Hey, my name is Seth Gale, and I was molested from the time I was 10 until I was almost 16 years old. Before all that started, I grew up in a single parent household. I grew up with a single mother of three kids. My father went to prison when I was about 2 years old. He stabbed my mom behind the ear and almost killed her. And so he went to prison for quite a while. I never knew him growing up. So this was kind of a perfect storm for my abuse situation. My mother would end up getting into drugs and become more and more abusive. So I didn't really have much of a reason to be at the house. And when I was about 10 years old, I met this man through a friend of mine, and I was introduced and invited to come up to his house and play video games on the weekends. And this old man was about 29, 30 years old when I met him. He was 6'5", 380 pounds. He's a really, really big guy. He's a Hispanic guy, and he always wore these wire frame glasses, um, and he had long black hair, was slicked back. And when he walked in the first time I met him, he walked in the house, and I saw him, and he was built. He's very big, and he didn't look sloppy. He looked like he could throw a hard punch, but he was also a very kind, friendly guy. As soon as I met him, I was immediately you know, I was interested. He asked me if I liked playing video games, if I liked football, and I did. I liked all of these things. So he invited me to go with my friend to his house for the weekend. And I went home and I asked my mom, and my mom said, as long as your friend's going with you, you're okay. So I go to his house, and within about a month or two, I was going by myself, and I was going every single weekend. And within about 3 months of meeting the guy, that's when he first started kind of touching me and making his moves. Um, I was oblivious to everything initially when I first went up there. Despite being molested, even when I was 5 years old, I was molested by a babysitter, and that was actually reported, but nothing ever came out of that, unfortunately. So, despite all of that happening, even at a very young age, and I remember that at that time, I I was oblivious to the fact of what this guy was doing, and he had lured us in with video games and pizza and pop, and it was like a kid's paradise. Every weekend we went up there, it was just a great time. It was You could do whatever you wanted to do. You were allowed to cuss, drink coffee, energy drinks, whatever, and it was like a kid's paradise for the whole weekend. So unfortunately, I fell for that trap, and I suddenly had found myself like sitting in his lap quite often. And so the first time he touched me was his left hand was on my left hip, and I remember his hands were so big, and they were very rough. He could take his knuckles and rub them together, and it would sound like sandpaper or sound like two rocks rubbing together. He had these big hands, and his knuckles were really, really dry and like just very rough. Had long nails, and those are the things that I remember a lot about him because his hands were always on me, and so I remember the first time he touched me. He grabbed my butt, and he kind of said it was an accident. And I said, no, it's okay, not a big deal. So he grabbed me again and said, so it's okay if I put my hand here. And right at that moment, I kind of knew what I was in for, unfortunately. So I was looking for an escape from home. So going to his house was kind of my escape on the weekends, because during this time, my mom was getting heavily into like crack and cocaine, and she was very abusive. And so on the weekends, I'd go to his house, and every weekend, Friday after school, he'd come and pick me up, and I'd be there from Friday to Saturday. And this went on and on and on. And after the first time he touched me, after that weekend, it basically progressed every single weekend from there on out. It progressed to him putting his hands in my pants, to touching me around my butt and my penis, and then it eventually moves on to him trying to stick his fingers inside of me. And I remember telling him like it hurt really bad, and he was kind of asking why, and what's going on, and which is crazy to think that he was asking these questions. But I told him his nails hurt really bad. And so what's really disturbing about this is that he actually trimmed his nails for me so that he could use his fingers and it wouldn't hurt. So then that started to happen, and then like I said, every month it was just like escalation, escalation, and it got to the point where to him, we were basically in a relationship. He was like 30 years old, I was 10, and he just had unsatiable urge or desire to have sex and to do sexual acts with this little boy. I was a very tiny little boy, had really long hair down to my shoulders, and he would tell me that I was pretty. And I knew the guy's family. I knew the guy's mom. I knew his sisters. I would go to the guy's family events, and his family, his mom, told me I was too pretty to be a boy one time. And so he really took that and ran with it. And he would always make those jokes about I'm too pretty to be a boy. And he would use that against me when he was molesting me or abusing me. And one of the really bad things about this whole situation was I was never able to dissociate from it. So every time I went back to his bed, I was there present, fully aware of what was going on the entire time. I was never able to escape that reality of what was happening to me. And it would go on for 3, 4, 5 hours. We'd lay back in that bed, and it would be him touching me, saying things to me, kissing me, making me touch him. And then by the time I was 12, my mother had been taken away from me, and that's a whole other story, but she was taken away from me one day. And so I had already lost my dad. I never grew up with him. My mom is gone now. And so this is just a perfect storm for a kid to fall into a sexually abusive relationship or trap. And at 12 years old, that happened. So by the time I was 13, my grandparents had adopted me, but also um, I had experienced every sexual experience you can have with this grown man. We to include like oral sex, reciprocating oral sex with one another, and when I was 13 years old, he eventually raped me. And I remember that night. I remember everything about it. I remember being there in his bed. He had this big bed, black sheets, black blanket, and I remember being there on his bed and my tiny little body, and just I remember the Vaseline. I remember him putting Vaseline on me and doing and raping me, and I remember him, finishing and cleaning me up, and then going to the bathroom and sitting on this toilet, just wanting to die. I wanted to kill myself. My life is over, right? I had been through so many traumatic things with abuse, with my mom, and drugs and violence, and then to be sexually abused and raped at this point at 13 years old. My life was over. It was ready for me to kill myself as I'm getting his fluids out of my body on the toilet. And so um, this would go on for a couple more years. And it was every single weekend. If there's 52 weekends in the year, I was at his house probably 45 weekends out of the year. And when I was about a month away from turning 16, I was at his house again. And I had a friend with me, a younger friend. And my younger friend had went back in his bed with him. And this was the first time I remember seeing my younger friend go back there. And so I told myself, like, I'm not going to let this happen to anybody else. This has happened to me. I'm not going to let it happen to anybody else. So I messaged my friend who introduced me to the guy 5 years prior on his video game, and I said, hey, I need to talk to you tomorrow. And so my friend comes to my house tomorrow, and he's like 5 years older than me. And we're walking around my room. I was 15 at this time. My friend's in the room with me. I'm talking to him, and I say, hey, there's something I got to tell you. I've been wanting to tell you for a long time. I don't know how to say it. And, I'm kind of pacing back and forth, and I can't get the words to come out of my mouth. And all of a sudden, my friend, this is the kid that introduced me to the abuser, all of a sudden he says, he touched you, didn't he? And at that point, I fell apart. I start crying. I fall to the floor. I'm panicking. I'm sweating, crying, sweating profusely. Can't control my emotions. And the next thing he says to me is, well, he did it to me too. And I was completely oblivious to this. So, this guy was a family friend. He was funny. He was smart. As a matter of fact, in the small town of Bluffton, Ohio, he ran a haunted house on every year on Halloween. He ran a haunted house at his mom's house, and so at the end of the haunted house, he would be there handing candy out to all of these kids in this tiny little town. So there's no telling how many victims he had, but he had at least two. And my friend asked me, "What do you want to do about it? Do you want to keep it a secret, or do you want to report?" And I said, "Hey, we got to report him. Like, I'm not going to let this happen to anybody else." So we go down to the hospital. We do the report. We fill out a rape kit, or they do the rape kit on me because I was raped that weekend actually. And I told the nurses and everybody there that I have his DNA on my body. I said, I have it. It's in my shorts. It's on my body. You can test me right now. And so they were very proud of me for not taking a shower, for making sure that I kept everything on me, didn't change my clothes that weekend. And so they test me. They find his DNA in like 2 or 3 places, and the police officer goes up and arrests him that night, and they get him to confess. He confesses to a few things, and then over the course of the next month or two, he gets sentenced to prison. And he was sentenced to prison in 2011. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, and it's 2024 as of this video. So think about that. He would be free today. Fortunately enough, he passed away in prison. Not really sure what happened, but he was about a year away from getting out. He requested parole. He was denied, and then he passed away. So um, that's my story of the sexual abuse and the molestation. Over the course of almost 6 years, I probably had well over, I mean, probably in the 300 to 400 range of occasions. So, like every little like interaction, whether it was touching, oral sex, or raping me, and in combination of everything, probably 300 to 400 occasions, because it was every single weekend. And his plan was that when I turned 18, we could make it legal and we could be in a relationship. I mean, that was his plan. That was his idea, and he would tell me that. And because that happened to me, it really took a toll on my life, emotionally. I'm married. I have 2 kids, and so it's very hard for me to be affectionate with my wife sometimes because of this. And I've kept this thing as a secret forever, and now I'm speaking, and I'm actually writing a book about it all. My Instagram handle and YouTube handle is Go Beyond the Shadows. And now I'm speaking publicly about this. I'm trying to educate school systems. I'm trying to educate kids and parents and anybody else who will listen to my story so that we can protect and save children in the future. And a lot of this will all be detailed in my book that comes out later this year in 2024. So you can follow me on any one of my social media platforms, Seth Gale or Go Beyond the Shadows, and all my information will be out there. But the biggest reason why I speak is to let people know the power of speaking and reporting for yourself. So many people, so many victims, I think, are chasing this justice. And if they don't get the justice, they feel like they spoke for no reason. Listen, when you speak and you come out about something like this, there is a support system. There are people there to help you. Even if you don't come out publicly, just you can report in private, and there are people there to help you heal. So whether you do it privately or publicly, you have to focus on yourself and focus on healing. So if you do it publicly and you try to put somebody away in prison and it doesn't happen, please do not get focused on that. We need to move past it and heal ourselves. Because even if you do put that person away in prison for the rest of their lives, if you did not heal, you did not get anything out of it, right? So you have to focus on yourself. You have to be selfish in that way of making sure that you are healing, and not letting this hold you back, right? And speaking out, and or even just telling somebody in private, and repeatedly talking about it and processing your emotions and what happened to you in great detail is very important. It's very therapeutic, and it's going to help you heal and understand what happened to you. Um, Also, how it will affect you as an adult, how it's affected me, like I said, with my marriage and who I am today. So thank you all for listening to my story. It was certainly a tough ride going through, like I said, over 5 years of the molestation, um, and experiencing every single like sexual act that you can have with a grown man by the time you're 13 years old was very painful. It was very, hard for me to get through my life. But in my life, I have served my country for 8 years. I've been to Afghanistan on a combat deployment. I've also won national construction awards. I've done things in my life. I run ultra marathons now. I do jujitsu. I've done amazing things and built amazing relationships in the time, since in my adulthood. And so I tell my story to inspire others that this doesn't define me. This is just a piece of who I am, and that's okay. I'm serving the life sentence of the trauma, but I'm making something out of it. And I hope you guys do find something powerful in my message as well. Thank you all for listening.